Well, the US is stepping up its campaign to prevent North Korea developing nuclear weapons. Washington is introducing new sanctions on Chinese and Russian entities it accuses of aiding Pyongyang's arms program. Joining us to discuss this is Geopolitical Futures founder and chairman George Friedman. George, great to have you on for us. What do you make of these latest sanctions? And, you know, is there really a sense that it is still China that has to do the heavy lifting on these types of sanctions?
Well, from the American point of view, I think these are directed against China and Russia. China has particularly been assertive that it was going to aid the United States, and there are Security Council resolutions. The United States is now making a charge that there are companies in China and Russia doing business with North Korea, and that this is a violation not only of the legal understanding, but with their basic political understanding with the United States. In other words, they're not doing their work.
It's interesting, though, because it comes at a time where, you know, you're kind of seeing this carrot and stick type good cop, bad cop, however you want to call it, play out, with Tillerson making some encouraging comments about North Korea not escalating. Is there a clear strategy? Is this good cop, bad cop, or is there a sense that this is really just that disconnect and divided views from within the administration?
No, I think there are two things going on. The first is that the North Koreans made a threat. They didn't carry it out. In the past, they've made threats and they have carried it out. And this is an important step, and the United States acknowledging it. The other thing that's going on is the United States is trying to speak directly to the North Koreans, not using the Chinese, but going directly to them. I think there was a link between the two things that happened today. One, we told the Chinese and the Russians, well, we don't trust you. You're not doing what you said you would do. Second, we said to the North Koreans, we understand that you made a helpful move. We want to make a helpful move. Let's talk.
Does this get us any closer to a possibility of dialogue?
Well, there has been a dialogue all along, two ways. One, the threats that are made to each other are dialogue, not a pleasant one. Second, the U.S. and North Korea have been conducting talks in Norway, in New York, in other locations. The two countries are talking. What happened here was that we came very close to the edge, and I think the North Koreans knew that if they launched missiles toward Guam, that would be threatening the major strategic airbase of the United States, and at this point, the United States would have a decision. They have slightly stepped back. The United States has acknowledged that they've stepped back. So we are talking, but we're talking about what kind of conversation we can have. I think it's hopeful that this happened, but then with the North Koreans, you never know. 4 missiles might be heading to Guam tomorrow.
George, before Steve Bannon left, much to the ire, apparently, of Donald Trump, he said he was asked about the situation there in North Korea and asked whether anything could be done. And I think he shrugged his shoulders and said, they got us. Have they?
No, but the price will be high in dealing with them. So the idea that the United States is going to be put in a position where a North Korean government that we don't understand, don't trust, can destroy American cities is not going to happen. Bannon is saying we're going to have to live with it. There's a great deal of American strategy being made now to minimize the costs. But he had one thing right. This isn't a walkover, and it's not something the United States wants. And the U.S. has no real interest in North Korea except in not having ICBMs. That's a basis for North Korea retaining its sovereignty, remaining intact, and the United States dealing with other more important matters.
So the price is high, but what is the goal? To remove those nuclear weapons, to denuclearize North Korea, which, as you're just saying, is not going to happen because that's the raison d'etre of the country and that's the only thing which is providing the means of survival.
Well, Korea survived since 1953, if you will, without nuclear weapons. Korea is not doing this simply to survive, because it has. And it knows perfectly well the United States has no interest in overthrowing it. South Korea certainly has no interest. The Chinese have no interest. What they're trying to do, I think, is establish some sort of formal recognition for the North Korean regime from the United States, which they don't have, some sort of economic relationship, so they're not completely dependent on China for their relationship, and to be acknowledged for domestic reasons and foreign reasons as significant power. Would they give up their nuclear weapons? Probably, because unless they want to commit suicide, which I don't think they want to, they're not going to use them anyway. So I think this is a brilliant game of brinksmanship. Unfortunately, it's the kind of game of brinksmanship that can push everyone over the edge.
Given where we are now, you know, the markets clearly see a kind of a pullback when it comes to political risk, right? But is it still kind of the fundamental situation? We have two leaders on either side. It can be quite unpredictable, and the risk of a miscalculation on either side is still quite high.
Well, I think both countries are predictable. Kim Jong-un, for all his strange statements, has consistently followed a policy of coming close to having nuclear weapons, but not quite having them, and opening up some sort of discussion. Donald Trump, for all the things that he said, has been very consistent. He's not going to let them develop nuclear weapons, but we're not going to go to war. So there is, of course, an element of danger, but it doesn't come from the irrationality or inconsistency of either side. It comes from the fact that each side is trying to calibrate its moves so finely and read the other side so finely. That's where the miscalculation may come in. But they're being careful.
What does this latest round of sanctions, you know, we've talked about, I guess, you know, where it puts China, but what does it say about the US relationship with Russia?
Well, the US relationship with Russia is not good. Paradoxically, whatever they did with the elections is blown up in their face. They've wound up in a worse position than they were before. They're looking for some leverage against the United States. We're putting more capabilities into the Ukraine and other things they don't want to see happen. They're examining whether or not they can do something in Korea, but they also understand that the risks of getting involved there from the American point of view are enormous. So they're a big player. It's China that's the major player, and China is the one that's going to have to make a decision. They keep claiming they don't have influence over North Korea. This is nonsense. Korea has South Korea, Japan, the United States facing it. If China were to face it with equal vigor, North Korea would be completely isolated, would have to make a move. So partly what's going on here is the United States is saying to China, okay, we've asked you to help, you couldn't do it, fair enough, we'll come back and talk about trade later. Right now, we're going to try to deal with it ourselves.
Well, absolutely. And if you were president of the United States, what would you do?
Well, I certainly wouldn't tolerate a nuclear Korea because I don't think they're irrational, but I could be wrong, and there's an awful lot of lives at stake. Secondly, I would see what there is that the North Koreans want other than nuclear weapons and see if I could provide it. And I think that's sort of the conversation that's going on. And the fact that they didn't fire nuclear weapons, missiles, I should say, not nuclear, at Guam indicates that they have capabilities, but they're going to hold back. That's not the standard North Korean style. It's an important implication. And that's why the Secretary of State of the United States jumped on it. Now we'll see what happens.
But behind the scenes, will that restraint, as Tillerson put it, really be seen as, well, as it was when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, a case of, well, North Korea blinking?
Well, in this particular case, you'll observe the United States has done nothing since March when this round of the crisis has happened. I don't think the Russians so much blinked during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They traded Turkish missiles for American. The myth of the Cuban Missile Crisis is another story, obviously. But I think the point here is not blinking. The point here is finding whether there's any common grounds. You have to remember that Kim Jong-un is not ISIS. He is not looking for martyrdom. He's rather enjoying his life. He does not want to be in a situation where the U.S. is targeting whatever bunker he's in and trying to kill him. He has as much motive in finding a way out of this as the Americans do.